Hello world, I'm Evan Gudmestead, an instructor of application and web development at Rankin Technical College. In this coding tutorial, we're going to build an ASP.NET MVC. We're going to build a website in Microsoft ASP.NET for an auctions app. And so there's a lot to this tutorial. There's a lot of things to learn. Let me demo this app along with the learning objectives, the things that we will learn in this application. You could see here in our app we have lots of paging controls, we've got sorting controls, we've got searching controls, we've got user accounts, we've got auctions associated with those auctions, we've got bids. You can bid on items, you can close biddings, of course you can add comments. So we've got listings, we've got bids, we've got comments. You can see what listings you've made on the auction site. You can look at what bids you've made on the auction site. We can create listings with server-side validation. So we've got FluentValidation. Again, we've got all of this saved in a local database with user accounts, so we can log in. You can kind of see I'm logged in as a Gmail. Of course, we've got user accounts with local authentication. We've got different users. When you have different users, you can place bids as that user. When you create the bid, you'll be able to close the bid, see the winner, and so forth. So this is a comprehensive website that we're building that's a very intermediate level in ASP.NET. If you've never coded an MVC website, this is a little bit like being thrown into the deep end. You can definitely learn from completing this site. We will be building this from scratch. But let me get into the specific objectives and everything that we'll learn. So that was the demo, but let me get into a little bit more details about the learning objectives and what we will learn. The first thing I will say, we are setting this up from scratch. And so we're building this from scratch. The technique that I use to bring in code, because there's tens of thousands of lines, or at least thousands of lines of code, is I copy and paste. I don't write every line from scratch because otherwise this would be a 25-hour tutorial. I will provide a GitHub repo so that if you don't want to write every line from scratch, you can copy and paste line by line as I'm doing. I do recommend building this from scratch. Of course, that's how you're going to learn. The more you type yourself, the more you will learn yourself. So this is an empty .NET MVC, and that is our project setup. We are using Entity Framework to tie into a local SQL Server database. And so that's part of the project setup. Our database itself is Microsoft SQL Server. We are going to use the services layer pattern. And so we're going to put a lot of our database logic in what's called a services layer. So that's part of the architecture. And we're going to be using the .NET dependency injection to inject classes into our controllers. And so that's part of the architecture. That's part of, again, the project setup. We will work with Entity Framework, as I mentioned before, and data modeling. Our entities are listings. We have listing classes. We have bids. And we have comments. And so we have one-to-many relationships. I'm going to go over an entity. One of the first things I do as I get into setting this project up is entity relationship diagram. And so we have one-to-many relationships between all of these entities, and we're going to look at an ERD and kind of start with a data-driven web application. Again, we're going to be using .NET Core Identity for our local user accounts. And so you're going to learn how to bring in user accounts on SQL Server on a local database. And so we are going to be using .NET Core Identity. We're going to be doing CRUD operations, and so of course, you know, I always jokingly call developers CRUD monkeys. You've probably heard that before, maybe not. But we're going to be doing CRUD operations with .NET controllers and views. We're going to be working with view models. So not only models, controllers, and views, but also view models. So we have a listing view model. We're going to allow users to upload images when they're creating listings. So you'll be able to work with that upload control and upload from the client to the server. And we're going to be working with the bind attribute for security. And so we definitely talk about security as well. We're going to work with FluentValidation. What's really neat about this server-side validation library is it allows you to not only validate on the client, but validate on the server as well for security purposes. And it allows us to do duplicate database records, and so not allowing the user to have multiple comments. For example, you can't have the same comment twice. And so if a user double posts the same comment, FluentValidation will not allow duplicate records in the database table. And so FluentValidation is a very popular server-side validation library. As demonstrated a little bit, we're going to allow for paging, searching, and sorting, just very normal features that you would expect to find. And of course, business logic. We're going to allow for comments and bids and closing of bids and seeing my listings and seeing my bids. And so we're going to have custom business logic as well. So there, as you can see, there is a lot to learn through these learning objectives as far as what do you need to know coming into this. I will say that my pace is a pace for more of the intermediate level developer. And so my students, what I will tell you is that my students in this class, they've all been through like a 100 level, an introduction level course on C#. They've been through HTML and CSS and Tailwind. So I might not go into the technical detail, you know, when talking about C# features, you know, auto implemented properties and default constructors and primary constructors and, you know, data types and just all these C# foundations. Again, this is more of a somewhere between intermediate, beginner to intermediate level. And especially when it comes to HTML and CSS and a lot of the front end Tailwind CSS classes, in my mind, I kind of, you know, call it hand waving. I just kind of throw a bunch of Tailwind classes on the screen, and I don't go into technical detail on how those classes work, because that's a little bit of the prereq knowledge that my students have and that I would ask for you to have to really get the most out of this tutorial. Now, again, you can follow along and learn by being thrown in the deep end. I think that is a valid way to learn. I am using Visual Studio Community Edition. It is free. It is a new download in 2026 with .NET 10. So, you know, that is the latest LTS long-term support version of .NET. And when you're going through the installer, the main thing there, this is a free download. You can go on Visual Studio website and download it. When you run the installer, you have to install the ASP.NET, you know, web application templates. You have to get all the .NET templates installed on your computer in order to write the code that I will be writing in using the IDE that I am using. So that is what we'll learn. This is what we're going to build. Again, bids, comments, and user accounts and validation. And I hope you enjoy. Hope you enjoy the methodology of bringing the code in code chunks. And with that being said, let's get into it. So we're going to go ahead and get started building this auctions website from scratch, from an empty template. And I just want to encourage you guys, anytime that you're building a new app, to start with the database in mind. This class is called Data-Driven Web Applications. Okay, the title of Data-Driven Web Applications is there to reinforce the importance of the database and your web application being driven by the data. And so when I'm starting a project, even this isn't some huge app that I'm building, I think the best place to start from is with your database ERD. So that's what we're looking at here, our entity resource diagram, or other words, the structure of our database tables. So we're going to translate this diagram into database tables. And as we know, in normalized database systems, such as SQL Server, you have relationships between the tables. So you have one-to-one, you have one-to-many, and you have many-to-many. Those relationships are called the cardinality of the tables, and they define your code. They define how you set up your C# classes when we're doing entity first, code first entity framework. Okay, code first entity framework with our C# classes. So our database itself is not terribly complex. You can just see we've got 4 tables here, and the central table is really the identity user. So in .NET, there is a built-in user system. That built-in user system is called identity. Now, I will admit, identity is getting to be a little dated. Okay, there is a new user system that's built into Azure. Okay, so there is a newer way of building user accounts. However, just because we learn identity, as we learn the new Azure system, they can work together in a hybrid environment, so to speak. So we're not like wasting our time with identity because we are going to learn the newer system as well when we get to user authentication in this class, right? Chapter 16. Okay, we'll learn both. Okay, but for now, we're just learning the built-in local user accounts. Our user accounts are stored in a local database. Okay, they're not stored off in the cloud, that is Azure. Okay, so our users really it kind of starts with have listings. So you're going to be able to make user accounts, and as it just makes sense for an auctions app, your user can have as many listings as they want. So very simply, we have user one-to-many listings. So a user can have many listings, and it all starts there. Between listings and users, though, we have it's a whole bunch of one-to-many relationships. All of these are actually one-to-many. I do not have any many-to-many relationships. So once you can create listings, then you can comment on those listings. Of course, in order to make a comment, you need to tie the comment into a listing and a user. So you have one user can have many comments, and a listing can have many comments. So you have one-to-many between listing and comment. You have one-to-many between user and comment. Okay, so you can kind of see that the comment table, and you can kind of see what's needed in order to have a comment. You need both users first and listings first before you can have comments. And the same thing in order to have bids. In order to have a bid, one listing can have many bids. Of course, one user can have many bids. So it's just a bunch of one-to-many relationships in this application. And again, I just want you guys, I think it is good to remember in the future when you're starting an app from scratch. I would recommend starting with the database design first. And database design is not an easy task. You can easily, spend a lot of time trying to figure out where does the data go. and what's the proper structure of the data. I will admit LLMs are pretty good at this, so don't be hesitant to use an LLM when it comes to brainstorming your database design. But I do recommend brainstorming your database design, putting it down on paper, getting it into an ERD, and then here we go. Now, once we have our database design, actually, I shouldn't have closed that. Let me just keep that up just for future reference. Okay. Now I'm going to get started. Okay, so we're going to be using Visual Studio 2026. And this is a .NET MVC site. And create a new project. Yes. Okay, now from the templates, I typically choose C# and web for my filters up top. And then we are starting from an empty template, which is ASP.NET Core empty. I have it on my recents right here, but here's the other. This template does not have any content in it. I like to start from empty. And then where it goes on your hard drive, you can kind of select if you click there, and you could say where it goes. I'm fine with it going in the demos folder. And then I like to place the solution in the project in the same directory, and I'll just call this lecture auctions, or just call it auctions. I don't think I have any conflicts with that. Just call it my auctions app, .NET Framework 10, long-term support. All these defaults are good. We're going to let that spin up. Now, I'm going to start with my packages that I'm going to bring in, and I'm just going to go to my package manager, which is called NuGet, and I'm just going to bring in 4 or 5 packages kind of from the first thing that I do, and I'll explain the packages that I bring in, and students in my class will have seen these before. So before I even write a line of code, I'm just going to bring in, really there's 3 things that I'm going to bring in here. And in order to bring in the 3 things, there's 6 packages, I want to say, 5 or 6 packages that I have to bring in. I'm going to bring in FluentValidation for my data validation. I'm going to bring in identity for my user accounts. And I'm going to bring in entity framework for my database logic, getting my database tied into my C#. Okay, so I'm going to go to right here. I don't have anything installed. And yeah.
Why do we need to download packages every time we create a new product? Can we just do it like the entire thing?
I mean, if we did that in brief, but it complicates the project.
Yeah, there might be a broader way to do it more broadly, but and I'm not saying there's not even a faster, more efficient way, because I think there is, as far as if you go into your project file and bringing in packages here, or even the terminal, there's other ways of doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's really what do you need for your, and I think that's what Neil was going to say, what do you need for your project? Not every project has the same dependencies.
I think the way that they have it set up right now with the NuGet manager is that like you can install it in the root directory of your entire project and then select which projects are going to use it. But I feel like that can get really complicated with it. I'm not too sure if that'll work, but
Yeah,
I'm going to have to try it out first.
you have to try it. So let's find identity. So here's identity, and I will say that I don't need the pre-release. I'm just going to mark the stable version. So identity has some built-in Razor pages that we need here for the UI for identity, right? The user interface for identity. So these are the Razor pages. And then there's also identity with Entity Framework Core. So getting, again, identity and our database all playing nice together. Let's not do the pre-release. And then there's Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server and Tools. So these are our two packages for Entity Framework. So Entity Framework Core SQL Server. And we got to go find the Tools one. Instead of SQL Server, this just becomes Tools. Oh, if you don't select the stable, you even get an error message. So let me go Tools and then Stable. Okay, so that's 4 so far. And then there's 2 for FluentValidation, which we're not going to use FluentValidation until, not today at least, but we will use it later. Didn't mean to click on that. FluentValidation, stable version 12. And this one that is the dependency injection and extensions. Okay, but really there's just 3 things. We got a validation dependency, we've got a database dependency, and we've got a user authentication authorization dependency. So as we're bringing this in, you can kind of see here the little chunk of code. If you just want to copy and paste this into another solution, that's a quick way of bringing those in some way in the future. Just copying these. Now this is going to be an MVC site, so of course we need our structure of, MVC keeps everything separate, right? We've got a models folder. We really just need our folder structure, and there's quite a bit to MVC. Models, views, and controllers. Now there's also static files, which go in www-root, things like our CSS and static JavaScript. And images, for example, will go into www-root. And then even under www-root, I know that we will have a CSS folder, and I know that we will have an images folder. Just kind of doing a little folder structure here. And for the sake of, again, organization, I have a data folder. That's where our application context will go, along with, if we have seed data, along with, we'll talk about our services tier, what that even means. We haven't talked about that before. So we've got a data folder. Okay. And again, before we even write a single line of code, I'm going to scaffold in our some pages, some identity pages for logging in a user and registering a user. So right off the bat, we're just going to add some scaffolded code. I'm going to right-click the project, add scaffolded item, and I'm going to click on identity. I'm going to bring in some of these, again, these pages that are kind of built into the identity system. You can see it'll scaffold some items for us. And I like to bring in the login, logout, and register. Obviously, a whole lot more that you can do here that we will dive into. But I put the cart before the horse a little bit. We can't do that before we have a DB context. Okay, so I'm really too early on this. Can't do the DB context until we have our models and wire up our database a little bit. So let's go ahead and add some of our classes. Now, kind of going back here, identity user is going to be built in. So let's start with our listing. So our C# listing model. Now, this is like creating a new eBay listing, if you will, right? You're going to list something on an auction site. Well, in Code First Entity Framework, we know that this will become the primary key, right? This is going to be an auto-incrementing column. It's going to start off with listing ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need a listing ID. Just some normal things a listing would have is like a title, which is brief, a description, which is a little bit longer. Of course, a listing has a price. We're going to wire up an image. So every listing will have an image associated with it. Yeah, we do need an images folder. We'll save that image in the images folder. That's right. And then we're going to say, hey, eventually this can be sold. You can mark it as sold. By default, an item is not sold. If you bring in the identity namespace, now you can associate a single listing with the user, right? So we have what's called a foreign key property. We're going to mark the user ID as required. So we need this data annotations namespace to have this attribute for required field. This could be done other ways, but for now, we're going to require a user ID. Again, this is a foreign key property. And then this item is so you have access to the entire user. Now, in the last app that I did with you guys, I extended identity user. I don't know if you remember that or not, but I made a class called application user, and I extended identity user so that I could give my user accounts custom fields. Like, there's certain fields built into identity, but maybe not everything that you want. So I'm not doing that here because there's no custom fields that I want to give my users. However, I'm just kind of pointing out the differences between what I've done in the past and what I'm doing this time. Okay, in the past, we had our data type of our user was application user. That was a custom class that was a child of identity user. Okay, but our listings will have these attributes and one user associated with that listing. The user object itself is that navigation property where you can get the username and everything else. Now, a listing also has many bids and a listing has many comments. So we need to do that in our class. We need a listing can have many bids or a list of bids, and a listing can have many comments or a list of comments. So this is how you do the one-to-many. One listing, many bids, one listing, many comments. Entity Framework makes it nice and what I would think is intuitive, right? One listing, many bids, one listing, many comments, a list of bids and a list of comments. Of course, to make the compiler happy, we need a class of bid and a class of comment. Now, that results. So it's also interesting that just by setting up, what you don't see here is that I don't have a custom user account. Because I don't have a custom user account, I can't show you that there's inherent automatically, because I have a 1 on this side of listing, there's automatically a one-to-many relationship. This is the one side here. So automatically in identity user, each user will be able to have many listings. I don't have to code that. That's actually happening automatically thanks to Entity Framework. Entity Framework kind of, because I'm not coding my user class, it will automatically set up that relationship. If you set up the one side, it knows that one user can have many listings. So that's a little bit automatic. Okay, so now if I go into a bid, well, what is a bid? Well, a bid has a user and a listing. So I'm going to have a bid ID, and I'm going to have a bid price, because that's really the main guts of it. You're going to have a bid ID, a bid price. You need a user. This identity user comes from identity, so you need this import. This required. Could probably get away without using this, as I'm going to use FluentValidation. Okay, but a bid has an ID, a bid has a price, a bid has a user, and a bid has a listing. So again, we got foreign key properties and navigation properties for our bids. What does a comment have? A comment has a user and a listing ID. A comment also has a comment ID and, of course, the comment itself. So the comment ID, again, we're following convention here. The name of the class followed by ID is your primary key. You have the actual content itself. You've got the user. And you've got the listing that the comment is associated with. Okay, now we've got our models, and believe it or not, that's really all there is to our database. Kind of 4 tables that we're concerned about, and the one-to-many relationships between them. And now that we have that, we need to wire up our C# classes to our database by creating our DB context. And so inside of data, I'm going to add a C# class. I'll call it application DB context. Now I need to use identity entity framework core here. And I need to use my models. So this is using auctions.models, because I need access to my models. Remember, the primary constructor is a newer syntax in C#, right? With the newer C#. This part is correct. This part is not. It's not as base. This is, so when we have a identity, when we're working with identity, the parent is the identity DB context. So we have to set up the right parent here. And this to resolve, we need Entity Framework Core. So one more, using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And that resolves this data type of DB context options. Okay, so this is called a primary constructor. So anytime we construct this, we're taking in some options, and we're passing those options up to the parent, which is the identity in the identity system. So this is just a really clean line of code that does a whole lot. But the important part here with our application DB context is to set up, hey, we got 3 tables: listings, bids, and comments. So we've got the models. we've got our DB context to use the models to create the tables. And I think we are about ready to create the database. We need a connection string, and we need to wire up that connection string in our app to use that connection string. So remember, the connection string is in app settings JSON. We are going to use, as we have been using all semester, SQL Server database local DB. And so all we're doing here is creating a connection string. We're creating a connection string, which is just that. What are the credentials to get into the database? We're using local DB, MS SQL local DB. That's the instance. That's the version. And you can find this if you want to make sure it's running on your machine using SQL Server Object Explorer. So under View, right here, SQL Server Object Explorer. What's the question?
Isn't it supposed to be under allowed host instead of?
No, it's the order. The order does not matter. It's just a root level object, and that's fine. But anyways, so just to show you the version of SQL Server, local DB, MS SQL local DB. So this is the instance of SQL Server that I have running on my local PC. This is the name of your database. Not an encrypted connection. Integrated security is true. Pooling is false. Kind of some default options there. So this wires up my default connection. Is the name of my connection string. Now we can actually write some C#. I don't think we've written a whole lot of C# yet. Well, we've written a model and our DB context. So we have written, okay. So that's kind of like the default. If you go to the root, it responds with hello world. That's what you get out of the box. I'm going to have some usings up top. I need to use my auctions data. That's where my DB context is. Using auctions models. I'm going to use identity and entity framework core. Okay, so now what we're doing here again is we're just wiring up the connection string for our application to use our connection string. The way that this is going to be done, line 8, we're creating connection string, calling this method getConnectionString, otherwise throwing an exception. The name of our connection string, as we said before, is default connection. So read the connection string into a variable. And then in our services container, using the DB context and passing in our connection string to our SQL Server. So there's the line. Why are you not happy with use SQL Server? So it says DB context options builder. Let me take a quick look at this. Let me save everything. Sometimes I go out of order a little bit. I don't doubt that I went out of order with this. I don't think I'm missing a dependency. Let me look here. SQL Server. Oh. I am missing a dependency. NuGet package manager for solution. Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. I thought I installed that. I somehow missed that. Okay. Okay. Now you're recognized. Okay, what I'm trying to do is get to a point where we can create our database. By the way, I already did this, so I'm just going to call this auctions 2 just for my own example, because I already have an auctions now, so I need an auctions 2. So auctions 2 will have user accounts and these 3 tables. Those 3 tables will have those columns based on our models. And I think we are ready to create a migration. Let me look at a couple more things.
Can I see the bid model and the comment model?
Here's a line. Yes, you may. Here's a line that I added in so that when you create a user account, you don't have to check that box that requires you to confirm the account. Right? It's just a little one-liner that's like, hey, if someone makes an account, don't make them confirm it. Of course, better practice is to send them an email and then have them click that email. So that's what that liner does. Just a little bit more what I would call MVC boilerplate. Add controllers with views, that's MVC controllers, and of course that's the views folder, which we haven't wired any of that up yet. Then we build, then we run. So after the build, we're going to say use the static files that are in the www root. We're going to have authentication user accounts. So you got to have app.useAuthentication. That's for identity. Authorization. I don't remember if I'm putting in authorization rules in here, but just in case. And there's like a default pattern here. This is the default pattern, but instead of using the home controller by default, I set up a listing controllers to be our home page. I don't have any controllers, I don't have any views yet, but just this is the standard pattern, controller, action, and then an optional ID. And then last but not least, map razor pages for identity UI. And those again, those are those razor pages that we're going to scaffold in here in a little bit. I wasn't able to do that just yet because I didn't have my DB context. Let's do our first migration. Add migration, the initial DB migration. So this is an entity framework command that creates a bunch of .NET identity tables called users. There's our users, the user ID, roles, logins, user roles table. There's our listings table. Our listing has a user ID. Kind of what I would expect. I think it's good to look at the code that this generates just to make sure you're on the right path. You can see that there's a primary key called listing ID. You can see there's a foreign key. That looks correct. There's a bids table A bid will have a user ID and a listing ID, along with 2 foreign keys. That looks right. Comments has a user ID and a listing ID with 2 foreign keys. Some indexes to help look up data fast, just like a book index. SQL Server database tables have indexes to help you look up some data. That looks good. So in order to run this migration, we're going to update database. And again, this database name will be auction 2. And we can navigate to it. Auctions 2. Bids, comments, listings. Our listings should have a primary key and 1 foreign key. That looks good. Comments should have 2 foreign keys and 1 primary key. That looks good. Bids, kind of the same way. 1 primary key, 2 foreign keys. So this is all looking good. If I just, want to look at some of the columns, a listing ID, a title, description, price, image path, is sold, and user ID. So we're looking good on our listings. We got our connection string, we got our models. Okay. So step 1, start with the database in mind, ERD. What data do you want in your tables? Wire it all up. So there's already a lot that we've been through. Next up, let's just get to our home page. Let's wire up a home page. And for that, in my class, we use Tailwind. Tailwind is, instead of using the NuGet package manager, we're just going to command line PowerShell, and we're going to use npm to kind of bring in Tailwind. So Tailwind CSS. So we're just kind of following the docs here on installing Tailwind using this Tailwind CLI with npm.
I have a question.
Yep.
Don't we need to create an identity user model or no?
We don't need to. Yeah, I kind of touched on that. If you want to extend it, you can, but you don't have to.
What do you mean by extend?
Extending it means add extra attributes to it. So like if you were to go into this and you were to look at the identity users, the easy one to see is that
You wanted like a name. Or
yeah, that's right. Our users don't have, they have an email,
but they don't have like a name.
but they don't have a name.
Okay.
Like there's no username. So if you want to add a first name into that, you can by having a inheritance relationship, creating a class and extending identity user.
Wouldn't the identity need like your previous bits or something?
No, if you inherit from it, it'll automatically get that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good questions. Tailwind CLI. Okay, so we're using a little bit of npm. So we kind of install our package JSON. Then we can install Tailwind. And the way that I teach this in my class is that every time we do a build, it kind of minifies our Tailwind CSS into a output CSS file. So it takes an input file that we're going to call site.css, and then every time you do a build, it takes that CSS file, the site CSS, and minimizes it. So it like gets rid of all the CSS that you're not using. It's not some huge dependency like Bootstrap where you have to bring in all these CSS classes just to use a small fraction of them. And so there's some, this is done on build, is also when you're going to publish. So it should work when we deploy to Azure, and I know we've tested that already. So again, our input file is called site.css. It's going to output a file called output.css. So in our input CSS, our site.css file, I did not mean to make a class. Let me delete that. Add a new item. This is a CSS style sheet called site.css. And like the docs say here, all you do is import Tailwind CSS right here. Last but not least, we need to actually link to our output file to start using Tailwind in your HTML. Well, in order to do that, we need to finish up our views for our layout file. So underneath here, there's a new folder called shared. And underneath shared, there's a layout file. So new item called underscore layout. And to link to our CSS here, say go to the www root, go to the root CSS output CSS. And if I do a build at this point, that build should trigger our output CSS file being created. Build succeeded. There's our output CSS. We are now linking to output CSS. So I think our Tailwind is lined up pretty well. Now this part is the part that I struggle with a little bit. What we're building here is the shell of our site using HTML and Tailwind. As I've done before with my class, once you kind of get Tailwind up and running, I like to go to the components, documentation, and starting with an application shell. And so I've historically in this class, I'll just go to this stack layout, look at the code, and kind of start here. This is where I start every time with my class, and I just copy this in. Notice the render body is the important thing here. And also this does not include, this is all within the body tag. So if I were to just paste this in right here, your content is render body, and this is where I typically start. And then I got to delete this, and I put an extra thing here. I put the classes on the on this, and this is where I start. HTML gets these classes, and body gets these classes. Body gets this class. Okay.
You didn't actually put those in classes.
Oh, good eye.
You had to put that in head, not HTML.
You know? Good eye, thank you. So let's put the class on the HTML tag. And let's put the class on body. Okay. Okay, so we kind of start there. I'm gonna change a lot of the look this time, but just to get to the landing page, notice there's a listings controller that's our default and an action method. So let's just get to our landing page. So under controllers, let's add a controller. This is listings plural. And here's our index method. So let's just wire up under our views. We need a new folder, add a folder. Listings, add a view called index. So that should get us there. The last couple of things that we need is our view imports, add a new item, razor view imports, and this is we need access to our models, auctions models. At using, don't forget using. I like to put the root namespace at using auctions, and then our tag helpers really for our attributes and our HTML tag helpers. Okay, so there's our view imports, and then there's also a view start. Right click, add item inside of views. This is a view start, and that just says to use the underscore layout for our site. So we hit our listings view, and that's kind of where I wanted to be. And we are on our way. Now, obviously these links, not what we need. And so I'm gonna spend, I don't want to spend a ton of time on the layout. This is just HTML, this is layout, this is Tailwind. And so we've landed on our listings page. I'm just going to change the look of this a little bit using Tailwind. Okay, so what we're looking at here is 130 lines of HTML. And I do like to explain things as I go through them, but at the same time, if I explained every Tailwind class on here, I feel like this would be a 30-hour video. So let me explain what's changed. primarily what's changed are my main links. So here's my main links. They all link to different methods inside of my listings controller. It's kind of the home page. There's my listings, and then there's a create new listing. So these are my main links. Of course, I've changed the colors a little bit. I have here, if the user is authenticated, then you see a drop down for authenticated users. So here, this is a nice ternary type. You know, if the user is authenticated, is true, then you do this. Otherwise, it assumes false, and you don't do any of it. So if the user is not authenticated, you see the login and the register buttons. If they are logged in, you see, you know, the options with your username as well as my listings and things of that nature.
Why don't you just do that with the partial layout of
You can. You can. So yeah, that's a good observation, is that in the past I've used that partial layout feature. I chose not to do that on this one just because I don't remember why. I don't remember why I chose to not use that this time. Then you've got the same links for the mobile navigation. Notice under this div, we start to get to the mobile section, and then when you open up the mobile menu, you see the same main links. And you see the same kind of, if the user is authenticated, then show them this, otherwise show them that. So you really got two menus. One's the mobile menu and one's not. It's the same kind of links and structure. Other than that, right, that's all your nav bar. Right? So all of that falls under nav. Underneath nav, we've got our header, which just shows the title. So we've got a header section. We've got a main section where we render the body. And we've got a footer. So it's not a complex layout, and it follows that same stack layout from the docs. A little bit different colors. Last but not least, we have this this render section for our script section. It's not required. So if I boot that back up, you're going to see it's just going to look a little bit different, but you know exactly where it came from. There's auctions with the little SVG, scalable vector graphic. Active listings, my listings, create listings. None of these links work yet. We've hit the listings page. A little option to log in and register. So we're about ready to bring in identity now, because I really was jumping ahead. Let's scaffold in identity. Add a scaffolded item. Identity. Log in, log out, register. Now we've got a DB context. Probably need to shut this down from running. When this is done, you'll have the areas, identity, pages, and here are the pages, the login, log out, and register page. The unfortunate thing is that these pages are still built with Bootstrap. And so, of course, again, AI is really good at Tailwind. So I just went through and I refactored these pages to use Tailwind classes instead. And so I'm just going to bring in under the login page. Okay, these are all, again, Bootstrap classes. And I'm just going to replace them with Tailwind classes. So that's the login page. The log out page. And the register page. Okay, so really nothing changes other than the names of the classes. Now if I go to register, it looks like it's ready to accept that. If I go to login, it looks like it's ready to accept that. Let's create my Gmail account. Okay, and you can see I'm logged in. My drop down is not working. So if I go back into my shared layout, that's why. Let me if this script is not uncommented, that drop down won't work. So now I should be able to log in, assuming my Gmail account was created. And now I've got the sign out button that does in fact sign us out. Let me go ahead and register my rankin.edu account just to have two different user accounts. Okay, I got two user accounts. I can sign out of them. If I go back into my database and just look at my users table, you can see my two user accounts have been saved in the database. And we are up and running. Oh boy, all right. Students give me a 30-minute timer. Okay, gave myself a 30-minute timer, but I'll see if I can hold to it. So what operations do we need to do, right? At the end of the day, the sarcastic thing is call coders code monkeys, CRUD monkeys. CRUD monkeys at the end of the day. All we're doing is CRUD operations against a database, CRUD operations on a listings controller. Well, and I can't even read out of the database if I can't create my listings first. So I need to be able to create a listing. So I need an action method to create a listing. So inside of my listings controller, but the first thing I really need to do is I need to be able to get the create page. So if I just kind of say, hey, I need to be able to get a create page before I can then post a new listing, right? So very generically, this is listings create. So here's listings. Let's create our view called our create view. And now on this create view, we can post. Now, if I look at a listing itself, I don't need to create bids or comments yet. Okay, this is a case where if I were to, on my create page, have the model created as a listing, I would have extra properties that I'm never going to use here, okay, in my view. So that's over. It's not called overposting, but you have all these extra properties on your model that are not needed. So that's a good use case for a view model. A listing view model would only have the things needed to create a listing. So I'm going to create a view model, and it's going to look a lot like a listing, but it's not going to have the unnecessary components to create a listing. So in my models, I'm going to add a class called listing VM, and my listing view model doesn't have anything about comments or bids. Let's bring in data annotations and stop the thing from running. Okay, now my model here is a listing view model. There's a couple of lines of code that will allow me to use the identity system. There's a user manager, as well as I could pull out information about the logged in user. So we're going to inject a user manager, as well as have a using statement. A title says create a new listing. We've got an outer div, which is not two divs, one div. There we go. Now I'm building this piece here, this form. I want to highlight your attention to one piece. Since I'm allowing a upload control where you're going to upload an image, you have to have this encoding type multi-part form data. And so this is something on our form tag that you haven't seen in this class before. And again, that one attribute is needed so that we can upload images from the client to the server. And you can kind of see that it's encoding type is multi-part. This is going to be form data, and you're going to get an image with it. Now this validation summary says only validate the model, so we're going to do basically. Was that you, Deshaun? What does this mean? Model only means we're only doing our validation for each individual control. We're not doing a summary control of our validation. So our first control is our title for our listing, so our listing title. And put it inside of a div, and then we've got a description, and then we've got a price. And here's our image control, which I think all of these are pretty standard. I believe this is image URL, image path. Now, hold on, my listing ViewM. This really does not matter. I'm just going to change this back to image. No, this was not. This listing view model was not mapped in the database. And after that, I have one hidden field to hold the user ID, right? Because your listing needs this user ID as the foreign key. And last but not least, a submit button for the form. And underneath all of that, just a little back to the list. Just a little, if you don't want to actually submit something new, you can go back to the list. Okay, so here's our form to actually post. But I don't have a post yet, so I should at least be able to look at it now. If I go to the create listing view, I should be able to see that. So here's my listings create. Okay, I could see this. I could tell my create button isn't working yet. And something's off with my image tag itself. Let me close that, go back to my create. So here's my input control, label for image. Okay, let's just boot it up again, see if that image. Let me look at my listing view model. Oh, that's a string. That's why. How did I wind up with the string there? The data type is iForm file. I know why, because I didn't change it. I took it directly from my listing. It's a string in the listing. But here, for the listing view model, that iForm file has to be the data type for the correct control to render on the page. Now we get the correct control because we have the correct data type. Okay, but we have to post. We have to post a listing. So here's the get. Now let's create the post. Okay, and I will just talk about the parts that are unique here. So this web host environment, this is something that I need to bring in via the constructor. I don't have that in here. This is something that can be injected in through dependency injection. Let's go here, IWebHostEnvironment, web host environment. Okay, so let's see, we're sending in a listing, right? So we're posting to this create, in comes the listing view model. If there is an image, then we combine the path with the images folder. So it's going to be looking in www root images. And then we read the image file name. And then we have the upload directory combined with the file name to give it the full file path. And then we use a file stream to create the file using the file path. And copy the image to the file stream. Okay, that essentially puts the image in that images folder. So this is kind of new little logic here on how to get images saved from the client onto the server. We then instantiate a listing object, and we add the listing object. Now, wait a minute, this looks a little bit different, right? So here, and if you guys are zoning out, I just want your attention real quick, and I needed to hear this. So I will repeat it for you. In chapter 12, okay, there's this concept of in your controllers not having database logic saved in your controllers. What do I mean database logic? Like adding new items, removing items. We had a lot of entity framework code saved in our controllers, and they have that so much. Controllers should be very minimal. Controllers, what they do, controllers should be single purposed. And so what do? You know, they get a request coming in. You know, they might load data from the database and send you out to a view. So you got a request coming into the controller, and then the controller should send out the view. What a controller should not do is heavy database operations or heavy database logic. Okay, they even call this, there's a term for that. When you look at our chapter 4, in our chapter 4, we wrote database logic into the controllers. Okay, like everything else, separation of concerns. Controllers should be single purposed. So the recommendation is to take database logic out of the controllers. And the term they call it fat controllers. Fat controllers are controllers that do too much. They do too many responsibilities. We don't want fat controllers. We want to take that logic out and put that logic in somewhere else. And so this is called the services pattern. Okay, the book in chapter 12 talks about the repository pattern. The repository pattern does the same thing. The services pattern is just kind of newer than the repository pattern. So what I'm going to teach you here is how to take your database logic out, like your LINQ, your LINQ queries against the database. We're not going to be writing LINQ in our controllers. Okay, we're going to take it out and we're going to put it in the services tier. Okay, this is called the services pattern. It again is a single, responsibility of the controller. So this listing service, where all we do is say listing service add. That's why this isn't compiling yet, because I kind of take some of the logic out of the controller and I put it in, I put it somewhere else. So under data, I'm going to add a folder called services. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface, add a new item. This is an interface. And interfaces by convention start with the capital letter I. Now, what is an interface? An interface is a list of methods that you're going to implement somewhere else. Okay, so the listing service, what can we do with our listings? What are our methods? Well, we're going to be able to get all the listings. So this is a method signature. This is a method signature that the method name is getAll and it returns iQueryable. I said, we're working with iQueryable instead of a list of listings. And I kind of took the note here. Big performance boost because it can work with LINQ and be executed on the database side, not in memory. And so what this kind of does is this can set up your query to not execute until it's needed. Instead of loading all of the services in memory and then filtering it down from there, this doesn't actually execute your query against the database until you call the toList method. So instead of a list of listing, we have an iQueryable of listing. A few more methods. So as far as listings are concerned, we're going to be able to add a new listing. That's ultimately what we're going to do here. We can get a listing by its ID, and we can save a listing with save changes. So these are kind of the operations that we're taking out of the controller, and we're going to put them in the listing tier. So this is the interface that now we have to implement that with the class. And you'll get the pattern here the more we do it. This is going to be our listings service. That inherits iListing service. So we have a parent. Now we need to implement the interface, so I think it's control.enter implements these methods. So when we want to add a listing, that's ultimately the method that we're calling back here that wouldn't compile. Let's see, on our listings controller, we're calling this add method of our listing service, and we're passing in our listing object. This is something that we are going to see again in chapter 12. This is going to be something I ask of you guys to do, is to implement a listing repository or a listing service, a services tier, I should call it. A services tier. So this listing service needs to accept our database context, which is called application DB context, called context. And once we have this context variable, we can add the listing to the database. So here, context listings add. So this actually adds it to our listings table. And then this saves. Of course, we need entity framework in order to call that method. This needs to be an async method in order to call await. Okay, so now we have this listing service with an add method. We need to inject the listing service into our controller. Here's add controllers with views. This line allows us to inject our listing service class into our controllers. All the way back to our listing controller. Now we have a listing service called underscore listing service. Okay, so that just took a little bit of, wiring up to add that listing service, but all that should allow us to add a listing, send us back to the index page. I have to wire up the index page to view the listings, but we should be able to add one now. Let's go ahead and spin it up. I don't know that I did that services tier any justice on unable to resolve listing service. Back on our program, we need services, listing service. Let me read that one more time. Okay, so I'm not passing that in properly. Let me go back to my create listings controller. Oh, it needs to be the interface, listing service. This is listing service. There we go. So now if I go to create listings and I'll say red polo, an amazing polo, which by the way, I should probably lock this down so you can't do this without,
Authorization.
that's right, being logged in. So now that I'm logged in, red polo, a fantastic polo, $10 starting bid, choose the file. I've got redpolo.jpg in my downloads. Click on create. Okay, now obviously I need to loop through my listings and put them on the page. I haven't done that yet. However, if it worked, you'll see listing ID of 1, red polo, fantastic polo. The image path is red polo JPEG. It's not sold and it's got a user ID. And if I go into my images, it has saved the red polo. So we are looking good. Let me display that. If I go back to let me close all tabs. Open up my listing controller. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the getAll method. So I need to write this getAll method inside of my listing service. Here's getAll. And so these two lines
Basic.
I should probably this gets all of my listings with the user information for my listing. I don't think that's a good name, application DB context. But regardless, this gets all of my listings and returns those listings. Notice that return type is iQueryable. I haven't actually run the query yet, right? Because I could still put a filter on this, like a where filter, and then that way I'm not sending around. If there were 10,000 objects here, I would have to read those all into memory and send those all back. I haven't run this query yet. Again, that's the benefit of iQueryable. So back here, now this toList async needs Entity Framework using Microsoft Entity Framework Core. That brings that in. And listings controller. What are you not happy about? yeah, I think I got async await, and this says the return type, oh, task of iAction result. There we go. Okay, so here I don't put any filters on it yet. But I will when I start sorting and searching and all that kind of stuff. Now my index view should crash because I don't have it yet, right? Okay, well, I thought it was going to crash. Here's a view of listings. If I go back to my index view, I guess I just don't even have anything on it. So let me go back to my index view. I don't have any data type here. So here's our list, our listing, list of listings, auction listings. Kind of walk through simple, little bit of code, right? Some outer divs. We're looping through our list for each listing. We're displaying the image. We have a link to go to that listing's details. We display the description, the price, and the user's email. Because we included the user, we can display the user's email. And if there are no listings, we say no active listings, the end. So our homepage now should display in, I think it's like 4 per row. 4 columns, right? So here's our 4-column grid. 4 columns in our large grid. This guy created the red polo. Let me log in and put the other one in there. EA Gunstead at Rankin. Let me create a listing. Fantastic polo, $15 starting bid. Black polo. Okay. Cool. A few more methods to wire up, and we're done for this portion of creating listings. This is get your auction by ID, like details 1. And this is my listings, which I think I actually wire that up differently. I don't think I take it to my listings, but I'll take a look at that. So back in our listings controller, there's create, there's our create here. The next thing I do is get by ID. So this is kind of what you just saw, that URL, listings detail, then the ID. You pass in the ID into the parameter. You call the get by ID that's on listing service. Listing service, we need to implement get by ID. So here you pass in the ID. Now any individual listing, that's a lot of red. Any individual listing has a user, it'll have comments, it'll have bids. So we're including all of these things. Ooh, that's ugly. That's why that's my green squiggly. I don't know why there's red squiggly. First or default, and then return the listing. So this is a LINQ query. I know, let me take a look at, okay, so this is going to be async public async task. Okay, and then I think definitely repetitive there. There we go.
What was wrong?
I was including the user twice. Okay, so get the out of the listings table, include the user comments and bids, where the listing ID equals the ID that's passed in. Send back the listing.
Listen, model.
And that was in the listing service. So here in the listing service, we could pass that in. So this will get the listing back. It'll then return to the details view, the listing object. So we need to create the details view. Add view details. Start at the top. This looks like a lot of code. Well, it is because it's 140 lines, but we can go through it quickly. It can be summarized. It can be summarized quickly. Okay, so here's an individual listing. If the user's logged in, this is actually pretty cool. If the user's logged in, and if the item is sold, loop through the bids, and if the bid price equals the model price, that's your winning bid. So we got a nested if for each, another if the user ID equals the logged in user. So you get all these conditions to be true, then you say congrats, you're the winner. Otherwise, you display whoever won the bid. So either congrats, you're the winner, or someone else won. If the bid is, if it's sold. It's all pending on if the user is sold. So if this is true, you're the winner. Else if someone else is the winner. Else it just says bidding closed. Okay, so there's just a little bit of extra context there up at the top. You could see who the winner is or bidding closed. Here is the title of the listing, the title of the listing. Here's the image of the listing. In the images folder, model image path, so that displays the image. If the user is logged in, we show them the ability to add a bid. So here's the add bid form. Again, this is what we're wiring up for later. If the logged in user is the user ID on that listing, then we can show the list of bids. So if it's your listing, you'll see all the bids of the other users. Otherwise, you'll just see a count of the bids. You'll see who it was listed by. You can close it if you're the owner of the listing. You can close the bid. So that little Boolean field, you can change that with an action called close bidding that will wire up. You could add comments. If you're logged in, you can add a comment on it. And then here you could see the comments if there are any comments. So there's a lot that I breezed over there, but we don't have any of this stuff. We don't have bids. We don't have comments. We can't close the bid. There's just so much here that we can't do yet. but
You can see the view.
we could see the view. Obviously, I'm not logged in. When I'm not logged in, you see the controls, they're grayed out. You see the bidding controls, you see the comment controls, and here as you see there's comments, there's no comments. Right? If I were to log in and go to that same details view, since I created this, I can close the bidding. The last bidder is the winner, essentially. You can see controls to submit a bid, add a comment. Again, that functionality is not there yet. But once you're logged in, these buttons light up. They didn't light up when you weren't logged in. Last but not least, here's all the listings. Create listings. And I got to wire up my listings. And I do think there's an action called My Listings in the Listings controller. And it looks like this. Now, don't forget to actually include the method header when you're copying and pasting. So here's my listings. Now notice my listings sends us back to the home page, but we are now filtering. We're filtering where the listing user ID is the user that's logged in. So there's a where clause. So we're not getting all the listings, we're just getting the listings of the logged in users, and then we send that back to the index view. So that's kind of a neat little line of code. I don't have to write a new view for this because I'm just using the home page. Was I right? 30 minutes? Oh, wait a minute. I'm not logged in. Logged in. Did I keep it in my 30 minutes? Close enough? I'm over?
Like 10 minutes over.
10 minutes over. Oh. Okay, so now I'm logged in. I click on my listings. It just goes away. I only see the red polo because that's who's logged in. Of course, if I sign out, my listings, I just see the black polo. All right, we are well on our way. We've set it up. We got some listings going. We are well on our way to finishing this off. We do have a lot more to go, but like I said, we're going to chunk it up across a couple different days. So I'll stop today's lecture here. We'll go ahead and get started on day 2 of this auctions website. I estimate it's a kind of a 3-day little project for us. And so yesterday we have the ability to register. We made the setup. We can now register users, and we can create auction listings. With a little bit more thought, you might think that my listings and create listings should only be for authenticated users. So that's what we're going to do today. But that's not the main thing that we're going to do. The main thing we're going to do is when you click on an auction and you're logged in, you should be able to both submit bids. So you'll have a number of bids submitted, and you should be able to close bids. And then you should be able to see like my bids. So there's 3 features around bids: creating new bids, closing bids, and viewing my bids. So we're going to work with bids today. Bids is a more complex entity because a bid, as we talked about yesterday with ERD, has a user and a listing. So you need both a user and a listing for a bid. And then, like I said, there's more things. Comments are not quite as complex. You do need a user and a listing for a bid, but we're really just adding new comments. So where we're adding new bids, but you can also close bids, which is an update operation. And viewing my bids is a reading operation. So there's more operations. Again, CRUD monkeys. We have more CRUD operations on bids than we do comments. But that's basically the tasks at hand. We're working with bids, we're working with comments, and we're just going to refactor the nav bar a little bit. So that it makes a little bit more sense that you can't see links unless you're logged in that you shouldn't see. So with that being the case, here's the source code so far. A lot of what we're doing is in one controller, the listings controller. I'm going to keep the listing controller open. And yesterday we went through and kind of explained this concept of keeping your controller logic minimal, therefore extracting out the database logic. We didn't really extract a lot of logic out, to be quite honest with you. There's not a lot of logic that we took out of the controllers, but there's a little bit. This is, these are LINQ queries, like here, that we've taken out of the controller that is, again, working with our database. And then as well as the entity framework, like add method and saving, right? So we introduced this concept for a services layer, as it's called. So I'm going to continue with the services layer specifically for comments and bids. So there's different ways of implementing this. The way that I've seen many times is you kind of generate an interface and then you have a class that implements that interface. So that's what I'm doing in this project. We're going to generate an interface for the bid and a class that implements that interface. And then following the convention here, the interface, we'll start with the capital I, it'll be plural, and then the word service. And so here we define the method headers for the methods that need to be implemented by our class. Well, we're going to have two really methods that we're going to work with. We're going to add new bids and we're going to read all the bids. We're going to get all the bids. So that's our simple interface. Again, an interface is a list of methods that are going to be implemented by the class. So let's go ahead and add a class for the bids service that implements the interface. Now, when you implement an interface, of course, it's going to force you to overwrite those methods, or implement those methods, I should say. So hotkey is Control-Enter. So you hit Control dot and then you hit Enter, and it will at least put the method headers in there along with, hey, you haven't actually written this method yet exception. So of course you get rid of that, and we do async methods when we're working with the database here. So write that as async. And then in order to add a new bid to the database, we need to accept our application DB context in the constructor. So here's our application DB context. And again, this is called a primary constructor. It's a nice new syntax in C#. Now we can use this context to add a new bid, which looks like underscore context dot, and then our table is bids, and then the entity framework of add. So you need to pass in a bid object. We're going to add that to our table, and then we save. Await, save changes. So pretty simple method here. And I wanted to, like yesterday, I kind of mentioned this, that in our listing service, I didn't necessarily like, I thought that this could be written more efficiently. You know, the read all listings. So if this is like getting all of the listings. So you're going to notice I write this get all method slightly different. Now you are returning underscore context. Underscore context, remember, is that link between our C# code and our database. So we are still just returning a context. Oops. I need a dot. So the bid has a associated listing and an associated user. So it should typically, the first include is dot include, then, and after that it's a then include. So I rewrote that get all method, which is a single return. You're returning a context. Ultimately, you're going to be able to call a dot to list on this context. But I don't call it here, and the return data type is an interface of iQueryable. Since your context implements iQueryable, it is a valid return type. And just because I did this morning on my on my listing service, I refactored this get all even more condensed. So I thought, well, I can do it a little bit even more concise. And so this get all method, since all we're doing is returning something out of it, that's kind of the conciseness of an arrow function. All an arrow function does is returns context listings include the listing, put a semicolon there. So, you know, you can kind of compare before and after, and I like this nice little concise arrow function that returns the context. Okay, bid service now has been implemented. Now we should be able to add new bids. Where do we add bids from? Well, on the details, I want to point out a couple of forms that we made yesterday. Notice this form posts to the add bid method. And one thing here is that our property is user ID. So that's the only change I had to bring in. So here's one form that has that submit button. And you should post to a method called add bid. This form has controls for the, if you look at the name fields, remember those name fields via the model binding system that we learned about? Those names fields will be sent into a bid object in the method called add bid. So our add bid method will accept a bid object. These name attributes will be sent as fields over into that object where there's a bid price, a bid user ID, and a listing ID. So if we look at the signature, this is going to go back on our listings controller. And here is our method signature. So I just want to take a quick second and just look at the header. The method header is called add bid. It is a post. So that form is posting to this add bid. Price, listing ID, and user ID. Those are the fields that have a name attribute on our form. And those fields will come across from our form because they match the name attribute. Okay, so that's the model binding at work. This ID field, you know, this is a new bid, so really I could just leave that ID off. It really doesn't do anything for us here. But if there was a bid ID that on the form, but they're just not. So also remember bind. I actually don't need this bind attribute, but it does provide security for me. So I have this bind attribute, and what that forces, it's a security attribute as I mentioned, it only allows these fields to be a part of my bid object, right? So you cannot overpost to a bid if it's not one of those fields. You know, you can't put some other field into a bid on this particular method. This particular method only accepts these fields. Now, wait a minute, we have not brought in my bid service. So on my primary constructor, let's go ahead just as I did before. This is IBidService called underscore bids service. So that's dependency injection, and we need to, that's not going to work unless you set it up properly here. IBidService, bids service. So this is using dependency injection to inject the class of bids service into our controllers so that listing controller can accept any class that implements IBidService. So that's underscore bid service. And we say, hey, if the model state is valid, go ahead and add the bid, but also update the listing and save the changes on the listing. So we're adding a new bid to the bid table right here, really this line right here. This add method is a method that we just wrote on bids service. This calls this method, passes in the bid, saves it to the database. And then we pull the listing and then update the bid price on the listing and then save the listing as well. So a little bit of database logic, which you could clean up. You could put that in a service tier itself and then send you back to the details of that particular listing. Let's go ahead and put a breakpoint in here. Just follow the steps through the forest. Let's go ahead and log in with my Gmail. Okay, we've got 2 bids from yesterday. Looks like $15. Let's bid it up to $16. Submit the bid, hit the breakpoint. Model state is considered valid because it has a price, a listing ID, and a user ID. So go ahead and add the bid. Of course, that takes us to our bid service. Adds the bid to the table, saves the changes, asynchronous call. Go ahead and get the bid by the listing, I should say, by the listing ID. Update the price of the listing to 16. Right, it was 15. And then save the changes on the listing. Oh, I didn't implement save changes. So I got not implemented save changes on my listing service. Let me bring that in, listing service. That's very simple. Await, async await. Okay, so I'll run it out of debugging mode now since we got all the way to the save changes on the listing. Let's just test it one more time. It's a little bit of a bummer because I think I created a bid in my database, but I did not update the listing. Obviously, I did not update the listing, but I did create the bid, so it's a little out of sync right now because of the way that crashed. But if I just submit the bid there, now you can see 2 bids submitted and it's up to 17. I don't have, I do have some controls in place, at least some validation. We're gonna update that validation at some point. But now you could see I am able to create bids. And if I log in as my other user, my rankin.edu user, and think back to the 2 classes, how many times I've had to log in between these apps. You guys just waiting on me to log in. If I go here, object reference not set to an instance of an object. Now line 64 on details. So let's look at this. Details CSHTML. Line 64. Details. I am wondering if that problem that I had.
Was there an extra thing? Curly bracket?
No. The mistake that I had where I updated the bid but I didn't update the listing, I wonder if that's causing this. Let's try clicking on the other one. I logged in, and so here's the problem. I log in as my rankin, and if I click on this black polo, it crashes. Let me click on red polo, no crash. So here, and it says line 64. So if I look at line 64, bid username, but it's not even for each. So let's try a breakpoint. Model.bids. Oh, that's right. It is exactly the problem. My model.bids has 2 bids. It has 2 bids, but the second one doesn't have a username associated with it because it didn't save the listing. So I need to here's what I need to do. I need to clean up my database. I'm just going to delete the bids. This is auctions 2, tables, bids, view data. So I'm just going to delete these bids. And delete, close. So I got rid of my bids because, again, specifically that first bid was no good. It was a bad bid. So now if I log back in as my rankin, yeah, okay. What I wanted to show is that we now have bids. We can submit bids. We got bids. There's another thing, so that we can close the bids. You can only close the bids if it's a bid that you opened. How you doing, Mr. Reddick?
Is your internet down?
My internet is not down. Is your internet down?
Was it our department? Because you're on the schools, right?
I'm on the schools.
Okay.
I have no idea if anyone else is down.
Yeah, next door's down and I'm down too.
Okay.
Alright.
All right. So, kind of glance at, this is a whole nother form to close the bidding. Remember, there's an is sold attribute on our listings, and all you do on a close is you read the listing and you update that property to is it closed true. And so this is, we just kind of did the add form here. Let's see here's closed bidding. This is pretty clean, right? So the action is called closed bidding. So it's the listing controller, and it uses a ID parameter from the ASP route. Because remember, this is the details, so we have the ID already in the route. So we just need to write a method called close bidding. It accepts one input parameter, and then we need to update that listing. So that's pretty simple. Let me close all but this. Close all other tabs. We can now create bids. Let me open up the details again. So we just have details. Let me go back to, this is a form with a post method. There's no form here. This is just an anchor tag. Because you could make a form out of it, but there's not really many controls. It's just a button. There's no input controls here. Because there's no input controls, we don't need the form. So we call this method called closed bidding. That comes from the route. Get the listing ID, mark it as sold, save the changes, return to the view. When you close the bidding, I wrote some code yesterday that kind of shows you who won the bid. So again, I have to log in as the right user so I can close the bidding. So I got to log in as my Rankin EDU. Actually, just for the sake of this, let me, two bids. I think one was by my Rankin EDU, the other bid was by my Gmail. Now, I thought I fixed that. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Details line 64. Model bids. So let's put a breakpoint in and see what's going on. See if I can hit that breakpoint. Log in. Okay, model bids has two bids. Oh. So bid username EA Gudmested. Okay, my second bid, my user was null. See that? So my Evan Gudmested, when my Evan Gudmested went to okay. Yep. So now I need to look at my save bid, add bid. So my user ID, so the bid. Let me look at something here. So if I go to my bids, view data, they both have a user ID. So now if I need to look at the listing service, because the index is calling the listing service. I think when I'm getting a listing, I need to include the listing user. It's interesting that one of them had the listing user, the other one did not. Let's also see that my bids service. See, my bid service, it does have all the user, then include. Bids including the listing and including the user. Wait a minute, this is on my details. This is not on my, this is on details. Detail is a listing, so I need to go to the details method, not the index method. Listing. Here, listing service, get by ID. So this is get by ID, so I need listing. So when I call this, let me see when I hit that breakpoint. A little bit of troubleshooting here. Okay, so the first one is the ID of 2. So the ID of 2 is sent in. Where the listing ID is 2, including the user. And on this case, the listing has a user, which is my rank and ID to you. And then I go here, and then this works just fine. It's on the second one, model.bids. It might just be, I still think it is the original problem. I think I have to delete the whole listing. I still think my count is off by 1. I need to delete the whole listing. Because I think I'm just off by 1 count. Delete, delete. Let me delete the listing, and I think that's going to clean it up. This is the, I'm doing this on the black polo, right? I think so. Okay. Log in. Create a listing. Black polo. Okay. I think the count probably just got off by 1. Okay, so 2 bids. Let's go ahead and close it. I'm remembering this line right here. I had the included user, and then I had a then include another user. Let me kind of go back to when I've done this before and look at that line, because I deleted that line, but I think that's causing this issue because it was giving me green squigglies. If you remember that from yesterday, I remember that from yesterday, and I thought that I thought it was not necessary, but here we sit with this bug. So this is listings controller and get by ID. No, listing service. Data, services, listing service. Yeah. I remember changing this yesterday, but I'm getting that first user and I'm not getting the second user because I had, include, and then I had to then include l.user, and my context is just called context. All right. That's a green squiggly I was getting yesterday, and I thought, that ought to do. LINQ is funny sometimes. And when I say that ought to do, watch it be my luck. Hey, hey, cool. Okay, I got there. Just needed that second user. So there's EA Gudmested, there's Evan Gudmested, I'm logged in. And because I'm logged in, I see the red close bidding. And because I see the red close bidding, I should be able to click it. And then it tells me that evangudmested.gmail is the winner. And then if I were to log in as Evan Gudmested at Gmail, says you are the winner, right? Just the little ternary up at the top of the details here, all of this code up here that said, hey, if you're the winning user, say this, otherwise say that. Okay, so we can add a bid. We can close a bid. Then there is a view my bids. So this is just a link that I create. Listings controller. Take that out. Just as I can see my listings, I have another link for just viewing my bids, which calls the bid service, gets all the bids, where the user ID is the logged in user. And then send that to the view, right? That's the view that we're in. That's the details view. So we're sending that actually, no, that's not the details view. We need a my bids view. So in the listings folder, we add a view called my bids. That accepts a list of bid. View data title equals my bids. And just spit them out onto the page, right? So we got some markup here that loops through the bids, displays the image of what you're bidding on, and the listing title, as well as the listing description, the price, and the user's email. And that's if there are any bids. So this is a view that I need to link to in my layout. And so back here, yesterday, we were kind of dissecting this a little bit. And a lot of the code in the layout is in the nav bar. And so I refactored this just a little bit down to here. And this right here, my listings and create listings, I put all three of these links and I say, hey, if the user is authenticated, show them my listings, my bids, and the ability to create. So now you're only seeing the my bids if you're logged in, But then you also have to update the mobile nav bar, which is down around line 94, right here. So kind of the same thing here. I move those behind an if statement. And you only see them if you're logged in. So now we have the code to view my listings and my bids behind a login. Okay, so if I sign out, you don't see them. If you sign in, there we go. My bids, I've only made one bid. My listings, I only have one listing. Create listing is now behind a login. Active listings, since one of these sold, right, it should no longer be active. So active listings, you just got to update that little LINQ query on the L dot is sold. It's false. So now get all listings only returns the ones that are active. So one of those listings should fall off. Even with a little bit of debugging and troubleshooting, I still think we're going to get this done because all we have left is comments. So we can now bid, we can close listings, and we can now see the active listings. All that's left is comments. So comments go right here. Obviously, we don't have anything wired up for comments yet. You know the drill. Though we're going to add comments service, and there's only one method here. Add a class called comment service. Brings in the database context, implements the interface. It's an async await. Context dot comments table dot add comment. So add the individual comment to the comments table, save the changes. Simple couple liners there. Dependency injection to inject the class comment service. And that allows us to I get too much opened up, I gotta close it all down. Close all tabs. I know the form is on details and the controller is where we need to write the method. So listings controller. Now back here on the form, just like I did before, you know, you got to know your form, you got to know your form controls. So what are the names? That's what you have to pay attention to. We've got a content, the user ID from identity, and the listing ID. And when we submit, we go to the post add comment. So here's the add comment post. We've got the content name, the listing ID, and the user ID, comment object. We have to bring in the comment service up top. Save the comment and get the listing and go back to the details view. Comments are pretty easy compared to bids, and bids are not so bad compared to listings. I think actually some of the harder code was a little bit yesterday in my view. Let's log in. I'm both selling the polo and I really want the polo. Second comment, post details, line 129. So we got to the details. On line 129. Let's go back to details. Okay. This is on my listing. Model.comments. Let me go. Let's look at the database first. Comments, view data. We have 2 comments. So we're doing good there. They're by 2 different users. I suspect it's going to be something similar to what I just fixed not that long ago. So my listing service. Yep. So when you get the comments, you need to also then include the user, then get the bids, and then get the user. So this include and then include, it's like, you know, once you get the comments, you need to get the user on the comments. And once you get the bids, you got to get the users on the bids. Similar error that I was having before, and I was almost able to get there. I would have spent a little more time, but we got there. I think that's going to fix it. wasn't getting the then include on my comments. Yay. Okay. We have bids, we have comments, we have listings. Still to go. I want to get paging enabled. So we're going to bring in paging controls, even though you guys have already done that. Searching, paging and searching tomorrow. Maybe a few other things, but for now, we are on track. All right, day 3 of our auctions app, and the tasks at hand today are pretty simple. We are going to enable searching, sorting, and paging. We're going to have paging controls. We're going to enable searching for individual listings, pagings, and sorting. You could sort by, well, there's kind of 3 things you could sort by: the bid, the description, or the title, right? So those are the 3 things we're going to do. In order to do those 3 things, we need enough dummy data. So the thing that I'm going to ask you to bear with me, and this will take 5 minutes, is I'm going to create at least 10 or 15 listings so that we can search, sort, and the like. Now, I'll create this listing once, and then I'll just let you guys ignore me for a minute, and I'll pause the recording. I'm going to create one listing, and just highlight one unique thing here. Tomorrow we're going to clean up the validation, because this validation needs some work. An amazing green polo, $1 starting bid, and I have a bunch of images that I've downloaded into a folder here, and what I want to show is where I got images from. You guys, my class, you should have seen this by now, unsplash.com. If I go into here, and you could search for anything that you want. If I search for polo shirts, and then you simply change the license to free. When you change the license to free, these are now available for download. So all I did was I clicked on the image, I click on download for free, I click on small, and this is where I'm getting my images from. This is one popular site. Pexels, P-E-X-E-L-S is another. These are common sites. Okay, so that's where I'm getting my images from. Let me pause the recording. I'm gonna do about 10, maybe 15 shirts. Okay, and feel free to ignore me for the time being. Okay, I've got 12. I wound up with 12. Your results may vary. The point here is that you need enough items to be able to page through and sort through and search through. And so you need all of this in your database. There's multiple ways to seed this data. I chose to manually seed it this time, but if I had to do this twice or 3 times, I would probably choose another alternative method. It's also the case that all my listings are all by my Gmail account, since that's who I'm logged in with. Now, thankfully, this application, it really comes down to 2 things that we're modifying today. This is the index method of the index view. This is our home page. And so really we've been jumping over like 50 files that we've been working with. Thankfully today it really gets simplified down to 2 files, because this is just the home page that we're providing this functionality on. And I don't know, I feel like my class has done this before. You guys, I literally just graded a test where you guys had paging controls and searching and filtering, maybe not sorting. Did you guys sort? Have you guys had sort controls? Yes, you have. Okay, so that's sort is like you just pick your category and you get like descending order by price. You sort your listings. Okay, well, we're going to do sorting. If
It was Not by like ascending and descending.
Oh.
Okay. And so really I'm gonna start, where do I want to start? I'm gonna start here with our routing system inside of ASP.NET. And so I have not added any default, custom routing. And so I guess I should start by saying there's always many ways to solve problems. You guys know that. You know, given a problem, 10 of you students can solve it 10 different ways. Okay, so this is kind of where I've landed to solve the searching and filtering and paging. This is the solution that I like. You might solve differently, but the way that I like is, we've kind of learned, to have these different route segments and the benefit of having route segments. You could put it all in a route segment, all three, because there's three things: a search term, there's a paging field, if you will, and a sorting field. So there's kind of three terms that you could do. And if I were to refactor this code one more time, I would consider putting all three in the routes. I didn't do that here. I just put 2 of the 3 in the routes, and I put the third one in a query string. Okay, but what I've put here, right? I've added a custom route that is /listings with a static page and then a dynamic number. So page 1, page 2, page 3. And then sort by, and then a custom field. So sort by title, sort by price, sort by description. And so this is a new route that will allow us to put some of the data directly in the URL. And this was kind of something that we saw in the book, and I like this solution. And there's this defaults attribute. I've shown you this once before. So this says, hey, that this route is also using the index method of the listing controller. So even though the custom route is this URL, you tell it to specifically use the index method of the listings controller. Anytime that route is hit, we land on this index method. Okay, so that's kind of where I think it makes sense to start. I made a custom route to put this data up in the URL. So we now need this listings controller to receive those variables. And so there may or may not be a search string. So this is, again, you can kind of envision the text box, the Google text box. They click on search, and the text in the search that the user just gave you goes up into the query string. If that query string exists with a search value, then it will be accepted into this method. There's also, now this is an optional parameter. These are mandatory. The number field, which is our page num. This is our page number 1 is the default. And a sort by. So these are required. And if you don't provide them, the default will be assumed. So the default is page 1, and the default sort is on the title. So I'm going to kind of comment out what we had here, which was just getting all the listings. That's what we were doing before. And again, you've seen a little bit of this logic before out of me. We're going to define our page size. I want 5 items per page. You can change it to whatever you wish. But I like this for a small demo. 5 items per page. And this is a field. This actually belongs at the class level, not inside of the method. So here we had this listing service, get all. I kind of start my query that calls this get all method. Now remember, that just is a get all method out of our listing table. Okay, but I haven't run this query yet. The first thing to do is say, hey, if there's a search string, put a where clause on that query. If that search variable has a value in it, go ahead and update that search query with a where clause, where the title contains what they're looking for or the description contains what they're looking for. So just update the query if there's a search value. I kind of jump into the sort next. I say, hey, it's not sorty by, it's sort by. So let's go ahead and update our query to order by. So the LINQ order by, if the sort by is title, then we order by title. If the sort by is description, then we order by description. If it's price, then we order by the listing's price. This should say L. Okay, so here if they change the sort, we change the order by. And this underscore is kind of like your default. This underscore is kind of like your default, right? So remember the switch, the C# switch has a newer syntax. You used to not be able to use this syntax, but the default is the underscore, meaning if it doesn't match one of those three, then do this instead. Okay, so we've addressed the search term. We've addressed the sort by with our C#. The next thing to do is address the page number. Keep in mind there's a little bit of math involved here. It's not much math, but the next thing here would be for the pagination.
It's currently pronounced pagination.
Pagination.
But they're wrong.
So here we go. So how many items do we have? In our example, I think I've got 12. So total items equals 12. That's, you're counting the items in your query. So we got 12 items. Total pages is 5.0. So you're dividing by 5.0. So you're not doing integer division. You've got 12 divided by 5.0. So you're not truncating. Remember, integer division truncates the remainder. So you get 2 point whatever. You get your decimal place. Math.ceil rounds up. Since we've got 2.3 or whatever it is, 2.3, it rounds up to 3. So total pages becomes 3. We've got 3 pages, right? Page 1 has the first 5. Page 2 has the second 5. Page 3 has the last 2. We then say, okay, what listings do we actually need? Our listings, we might need to skip. So by default, our page number is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 times anything is 0, so we skip 0. Take 5 and give it to a list. So the first time, if you don't change that num, this will take the first 5 items from your query and just return those first 5 items and send that to the listing. Okay, but if num becomes a different page number 2, 2 minus 1 is 1, 1 times 5 is 5, and we skip 5. And then you take the next 5. So you get results 6 through 10. 6 through 10, that's 5 numbers, and you return results 6 through 10. You understand the math? Thumbs up. Follow the math. We got some thumbs. Cool. Have you seen that before? Good. Because I copied and pasted from another lab another demo. Okay. So that's all there is to the logic on the controller side. This handles all 3 of those scenarios. Now it comes down to the markup. We just got to provide the controls Wait a minute, is that everything? That is everything. Okay. I don't know why I felt like I forgot something here. Might have been a little bit different. So we got razor views. Razor views allow variables to be read from our...
Are you ever going to use razor pages or no?
Well, razor pages are used in the area identity pages right here. So yes, these are, if I go right here, these are razor pages. They got the app page and they have a code behind, very similar to what you guys did in that second semester class with C#. You had the form, the desktop form, and you had the code behind. Razor pages work in that model with that model. So yes, we've used them. Okay. So what are we doing here? We just create 4 variables. This, getting the values out of the route data, getting the data out of the route data. So there's a num variable, a sort by in the route data. There's a query string. Remember, the search is the only thing that we're putting in the query string. So we read a search variable into that. And current page, this is just, instead of being a var, we parse that into an int, right? So this is just the page number that is an int data type. Okay. So inside of our page, really the first thing I do is I put a big old form for a search box. So literally right here, I'm going to add this search box. What do I want to point out here to you guys? Number one, there's no method to post to. When you don't post to a method, it sends it to itself. It goes to the current method, which is the index method inside of the listing controller. And because there's really just one control here that matters. This is just your hero icon. You guys remember hero icons? I kind of mentioned those. Those are my recommended SVG library, your icon library. It comes from the authors of Tailwind. Since we're using Tailwind, use the Tailwind icons. Okay, so really this is just your little magnifying glass. This is the only control that matters inside of our form. This control has a name of search. This name of search matches this variable name of search. That's how they're connected, by the name attribute and by the parameter on the index method. So if you were to click this submit button, it would submit this form and put the value that was in this text box into this variable. Now, if this is in a good running state, maybe this is a good running state. It might break from something else I'm not thinking of, but let's just see if we can search and see what it looks like. Okay, so here's our little hero icon, searching listings. You know what's funny? Where'd all my polos go? Oh, I only got 5. I'm sorting by 5. Okay. I'm like, where did they go? Oh yeah, I just got done. Hey, searching. Look. Now notice there's no custom routing here. All this is a query string, and I put the query string. Frankly, you can go up to here and change it if you want to. No black polos. If I just search the word polo, you get the first 5 results of polo. Now, paging, if you want more than 5, there are more than 5 polos, we just don't have the paging controls to see them yet. right? Whereas, so that's kind of simple, right? You just tie up a control inside of a form to a method index. Okay. So that's simple. Getting search to work, not too bad. Underneath my form, then I add my sorting controls. Now my sorting controls have anchor tags, and notice my anchor tags have some static kind of routes. This is going, but you recognize what this looks like, right? This is my custom routing. These always take me back to page 1, and you're sorting by the title, sort by description, sort by price, and then you can apply the current search if there's a current search. But again, so again, if there's a search like polo, the word polo, you want to maintain that. You want to maintain that current search.
Why are you using a graph and not like ASD?
I just statically wanted to hit these routes.
Okay.
These don't tie to any sort of controller method. These are just statically taking you to that route.
Okay.
Okay, because I defined that right here. I defined this route, so I wanted to use this because I'm sorting. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of manually go there. And again, you could code that differently, but those are my sorting controls. Let's save it and boot it up. So these are just essentially links inside of a div. And title is kind of the default, but I can change it to description. And you can see it does change the order. If I change it to price, you can see it's kind of going in lowest to highest order. So sort by title, description, price. Cool. All working. So now if I were to put in the word polo, it kind of, these again, these, yes, it goes to all of them. So I guess the point is that they are working in conjunction together. Now the next thing that I notice is like, well, why do I have a grid that's only 4 columns? I was like, let's fix that, make a grid 5 columns. Because I've got, since that's my page size, get them all on one row. Because that makes sense. Okay, now we've got 5 items per row. We've got searching, we've got sorting. And then we've got our div that loops over all of our listings. I don't change any of that. I just put paging controls at the bottom. And these paging controls, we can kind of step through them a little bit. There's a little bit here. So if the page number is greater than 1, otherwise it is 1. So if it's greater than 1, you show the previous link. And again, kind of the statically configured, take the page number minus 1 to get the previous page number. So you could just do the math, subtract 1. Otherwise, you see the previous, but it's not allowed, so you can't click it. So this one's a clickable link, and this is not a clickable link. Then you show the actual page number 1, page number 2, page number 3. So you see a little bit of if-else here for the previous link. You see the page number, and you see an if-else for the next link. So the next link, again, if it's clickable or not, it's not clickable. if let's see, if the model's count is 5, you should be able to see next. What does that mean if it's 5? Well, if it's 5 or 10, presumably you've got more to show, 5 or 10. But if it's 12, if the model count is 12, you don't.
The next 5 numbers?
Yeah, you're only going to see the last 2. If it's 12. So again, basically you've got a clickable next or a not clickable next. And did I mess up my nesting here? Maybe I did. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I just say add a div somewhere and it was fine.
Does look like I broke something. Oh, these paging controls go inside of the last div. So let me take these up a level, I think is what I need to do. There we go. That way all of this is inside of this outer div. Let's take a look. So you can see we cannot click on the previous, we're on the first page. We see the word page 1. We can click next. Click next. We get to the last page. Well, because there's 10 listings, probably you don't, that's because it is even 10 listings. Probably if there's no more to show, I could probably write that better and just not even show that link. But nonetheless, we get to the last page and you can no longer click next. So maybe you could argue that this could be written slightly differently, but it is a working searching system, sorting system, paging system, fairly easy code. Didn't really have to change a whole lot. And yeah, that was the demo I wanted to show for today. Tomorrow, we're just going to bring in a little bit of data validation. Going to bring in FluentValidation just so we can't have duplicates in the database. Clean up something that I don't like, which is these error messages that don't even mean anything. This is something you see a lot of. The value blank is invalid. That's a problem with MVC you see all the time. So I'm going to clean that up tomorrow. And that'll kind of be the end of the demo. So we'll stop here for today. All right. For my class, we are on day 4 of kind of building out this auctions app. And the last thing that I wanted to do is bring in some server-side validation with FluentValidation. And so this is not a new topic for my class, but I do think it's an interesting topic. Because data, as we just got done talking with the alumni, you know, their whole business that he works for that company is based on user data and monetizing user data. And so data that goes into a system is extremely important. The old saying is, you know, data that comes out of a system is only as good as data goes in. So bad data in, bad data out, good data in, good data out. So data validation is extremely important. And how I wound up on this app is I wanted to validate data. Number one, no duplicate data. I did not want duplicate records in a database table. So that's one thing that we're going to do. We're going to validate against not having duplicate data that's going in. And I do that with duplicate bids. In other words, you can't have the same bid twice. It makes no sense to accidentally bid for something twice. Maybe it was a double click on your submit button and it does a double post of sorts. It just simply does not allow it, intentional or unintentional. And then additionally, you can't just do front-end validation. Front-end validation by itself is not enough. And so on my form, the details form, I should say, when I'm looking at the details of a listing, we can in fact submit a bid. And there is this attribute on our price that sets up HTML5 validation. This minimum sets up a front-end validation so that you cannot submit a smaller value than the minimum price of an item. However, this min attribute, this is built into HTML5, and it will do browser client-side validation. That is not trustworthy by itself. So in addition to duplicate database records, I also validate just to make sure on the server side that the bid is in fact a larger size bid and that you're not submitting a smaller size bid. Because if all I had here was front-end validation, that can be tricked very easily by anyone who knows HTML. You inspect your code on the client, you delete that attribute, and all of a sudden you could submit smaller bids and be the lead bidder of sorts. And so you can't have that. So I did bring in FluentValidation into our dependencies. And so here's a couple of packages I brought in on our first day for FluentValidation. And as we want to keep everything separate and single responsibility, we'll go ahead and add a folder. Let's see, for our validation classes.
I have a question about FluentValidation.
Yeah.
Is this the only kind of validation we will use, or is there other?
No, you want to do validations in 3 places. You want to validate on the client, you want to validate on the server, and you want to validate in the databases. You want multiple tiers of validation.
Okay. Will FluentValidation work for all of it, or will we have to do different dependencies? Have different.
FluentValidation is just for the server side.
Okay.
Yep. You can write vanilla JavaScript if you want to validate on the client. You can just write if this field is blank, required field, error message, that kind of thing. So if I am adding a Fluent validation class, I'm going to call this my bid validator. And remember, Fluent validation is all based on inheriting from Abstract validator, that's right. And I am, where is my source code? Hold on. I got my demo. Okay, I just had a file put somewhere on accident. So we need to say using Fluent validation. And I'm also going to say using my models folder so it recognizes the bid class. And we abstract validator type of bid. And so this is, the parent of the class. And this is an interesting, the first rule that I write. Now, in order to, well, what's wrong is this needs to go inside the constructor. So public bid validator, this is a constructor, and this is where I'm going to put my source code. This is where I put my rules. And DB is not understood because that is the application context. DB context called DB. Okay, at the crux of this rule, right? We're looking at the price, and we're comparing the price that comes in. You're going to pass in the bid price, and you want to make sure that it is greater than the listing price. Like this little piece right here, this is returning true or false. So it returns, this isn't, obviously a logical OR. So if the listing is null, is true, you get true on the left, and it doesn't really matter what the right is, this will return true. And this will return on the right-hand side if the price is greater than the listing price. So this is ultimately, you want this to be true. So if the listing is null is a problem, that's a problem. So that's returning true. So in other words, if it returns true, price is greater than the listing price. Sometimes I gotta stop and think. Bid must be greater than the current listing price. I mean, you want this to be true. This seems like you wouldn't want this to be true. If the listing is null, that's an error. So that would return, regardless, you want this to be true. So in summary, you can kind of follow the big picture, follow along. If the price is not greater than the listing price, you're going to get this error message. So that's the first rule that I write. And here is the second rule for server side. Put a little semicolon there. Rule for the bid, where if the existing bid has the same listing ID, and the existing is the same user, and it has the same price, then this will return an error, right? So in other words, this is the one that prevents the exact same price by the exact same user by the exact same listing. It will not allow that to happen. So these are the two validation rules that we're going to write inside of our validator. The one-liner that we have to write inside of here is to register our validation bid validator with dependency injection, and there's a one-liner that we do that looks like this. This goes under right here. So this adds all my validators inside of my project. And so my bid validator can now be injected into a controller because of that line. That allows me to go into my listings controller and bring in my validator IValidator type bid, IValidator type bid called underscore bid validator. So obviously that's on the listings controller primary constructor. Now that we've got the object called bid validator, we can use its methods to validate bids. And so details, my listings. Okay, here's my add bid. So here's the method that we're going to use the validator on. I'm going to change this up a little bit. Kind of the first thing I'll do is I'll get the listing. Then I will run the validator. So get the listing, run the validator against the bid object that was passed in from the form. So here's the bid object. If there's an error message then, using this validation result, if there's an error message, if it's not valid, we loop over the errors collection, the errors array, I believe, and add the property name and the error message to the model state collection. So we're adding this to model state, and then you go back to the details view and you send in that listing. So that's in the event of an error. If there's no error, we don't need to check this anymore. We can simply add the bid, update the price, update the listing, right? So add the bid, update the listing, save the changes on the listing, and then go back to there. Okay, so step 1, make your validator. Step 2, register your validator. Step 3, use your validator. Step 4, update your view, which is the details view, in case there's an error message. So if I go to my views details, okay, so here's my form. Close the button, close the div. I've got one kind of new outer div. So I open a div here, and I close the div here, and then I put some controls in here. So these are field level controls, right? These are going to go on the bid controls. I don't have a summary control. So there would be a price error. So if the model state has a price error, then we display the error message of that price error. So that would give us the bid must be greater than the current price. So that's a specific property that was created by this controller. Add model error with the property name. The property name would be price. Therefore, we read the price error and then spit it out in a span tag. And very similar in nature. Here's if there's any errors on model state, display that. And so that's how I get the duplicate bid check to come out. Okay, so with that being the case, those are the 4 steps to add Fluent validation with some custom logic there on bid validation. Let's spin it up and see if I forgot anything. Okay, there's our listings from yesterday. Logging in is my Gmail. Okay, no bids. First off, if I say 39, you get this. Remember this? This is just HTML validation built in out of the box. If I was doing real client-side validation, I would probably not even, I don't like that, but it's an option. But notice if I go, something like min is 0 and submit the bid, now it gets caught by the server side. So that bid of 0, that bid of 1, it hit our Fluent validation, and even though I could have come in here and changed that minimum manually and trick it, if I didn't have that server-side validation, that bid could have been accepted. Okay, so that's the first thing. That's why you can't just trust front-side validation. You need some server-side validation. If I come back in and go back here, let's say 41. Okay, now if I do 41 again, we get the bid must be greater than the current price of 41. Now that second span did get spun up, but it did catch the first one. I might need to clean up that error message condition. because let's do this is I need a better error message. What that should say is that you already bid $41. Why does that not give me? Hey Charles. Here's the last piece, guys. Just like here on my your message. Don't forget your message. I forgot my message. My message, if this condition is hit, is to, you already placed this exact bid. The reason I did not get a good error message there is I forgot that last little method. So now, if I back out, boot this back up, all sorts of fun stuff you can do with FluentValidation. Okay, so if I'm logged in as my Gmail, of course I bid 42, 42 works. If I bid 42 again, you already placed this exact bid. And so you kind of get both error message, but if I do 41, then you get the HTML validator, unless, as I showed, you can kind of trick you can trick that pretty easily. Now we still don't allow that. Cool. Close the bidding. You are the winner. Okay, that's the end of this auction app. I enjoy remaking this one every year, and so definitely brought some new things to it. So hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll let you get to it.